it's Mr. T back again from sunny DR. In this video, however, we're going to jump across to Puerto Rico to interview a very sharp gentleman called Bruce Baxter, who I met down here a couple of months ago. He's been successful in business for years, as well as been in politics. And by discovering what he's sharp at, I found out that this topic touches us all, which is a potential financial meltdown globally because of the US dollar and what it's not backed by, should I say. But I'll let Bruce get into all the little details about that and introduce himself. And then I'm going to ask the questions throughout the video and Bruce is going to answer them. Here we go.
Hello, Mr. T, and welcome to beautiful Rincon, Puerto Rico. We are the surfing capital of the Caribbean, and if you have an inclination to ice skate, which I don't, we also have the only ice skating rink in the Caribbean about 12 miles from here. This is a wonderful place, approximately 50 nautical miles from the tip of the Dominican Republic, so we're really not that far from you. Of course, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. However, we are not allowed to vote in national elections, but are also not required to pay federal income tax unless we have assets in the United States that produce income. The truth of the matter is, as far as United States citizenship, it represents the very best tax advantages that you can find anywhere in the United States.
And Bruce, the first question is, what is our biggest danger?
Well, there are many of us that believe it's a world financial meltdown, and it will be scary. For those that think that the depression that the world suffered in the 1930s was bad, I suspect that the next one will be a lot worse. Probably because at that time, most of the world was still an agrarian society. In other words, they know how to do things, raise their own food, travel on foot, horses, that type of thing. That's not true today. We don't know how to do those things. We've lost those skills. A great example would be my son-in-law. Great guy, very well-to-do. About 10 years ago, he and his wife and two of his cousins were traveling on New Year's Eve, had a flat tire, and an entrepreneur, my son-in-law, another cousin is a lawyer, and the other cousin was a human resources manager, and guess what? Nobody knew how to change a tire, and they came up with a bright idea that they call a cab at about 11 p.m. New Year's Eve. Does that work? I don't know if that would work in the Dominican Republic. I know it won't work in Puerto Rico, and it definitely doesn't work in the United States where they were living at the time. Guess who changed the tire? That's right, my daughter. We've lost those survival skills, those basic skills that our ancestors had. We don't have many more. So financial meltdown will be a lot tougher this time. And what's going to cause it? Well, the United States is the world's biggest economy. We also control the financial systems around the world. Perhaps not intentionally, but we do. That's the truth. The dollar is the world's reserve currency to the extent that there are actually countries such as Ecuador that use the United States dollar exclusively as their currency. It's the only thing that makes sense to them. And there are many other countries where they have a dual system. But as everybody knows that travels to the Dominican Republic, it's all about those dollars. The United States national debt is scary. For those that are interested, they can go to, I think it's usdebtclock.org or something like that, and it updates by the second the U.S. national debt. And currently it's $23 trillion plus. On a per capita basis or per citizen, the debt is about almost $70,000. Per taxpayer today, it's $187,000. That's what everybody's share of the debt is in the United States. It's just scary. At the same time, the tax revenue, the taxes paid by taxpayers, about $13,000 a year. Well, eventually you divide that into $187,000. Can't we pay off our $23 trillion in debt? Yeah, that makes sense. Well, there's a big problem with that type of thinking, because currently the United States, depending on who you want to believe, spends between $4.5 trillion and $4.7 trillion a year, but our tax revenue, unfortunately, is $3.5 trillion, and so we're running over $1 trillion in debt every year. It goes up a little bit, it goes down, but it doesn't seem to matter who the president is. It's a lot easier to promise people that you're going to spend money than you're going to spend less. And sure, we do lower taxes at certain times to get people elected, but what does that do? It increases the debt. You know, as far as our overspending, most people think it's probably defense, but defense is not even $1 trillion. It's about 670 billion. Our single biggest annual outlay is for Medicare and Medicaid. That's our version of socialized medicine, and it doesn't cover everybody. And that's 1.25 trillion. Social Security is next at about $1 trillion. And like I said, our defense budget is a measly $670 billion. Crazy, I know.
And Bruce, what is hyperinflation?
Well, hyperinflation is what's going on in Argentina today. It's a great place for us to visit, but if you have to live there, not so much. But when you do, take dollars and exchange them on a daily basis. It is just nutso. I spent approximately 5 years of my earlier life living in Germany and had a great time there. And I can remember going one day to a store that sold antiques, and one of the things that I did buy was a German bill for 50 million marks. That was their, marks was their equivalent of the dollar. 50 million marks. In fact, you've probably heard the stories. This is after World War I, where it took a wheelbarrow full of their currency just to buy a loaf of bread. Can that happen again? You bet it can. What would be the motivation for doing that? Well, at some point, this $23 trillion in debt, which, by the way, it seems like every president we have in the United States, once they get elected, they just spend money like there's no tomorrow. They seem to be doubling the debt. And I suspect that President Trump will probably do just the same, because after all, he wants to get reelected. In fact, that's the politician's #1 goal: get reelected. You know, the economy, be damned. You know, they'll kick the can down the road. There's always tomorrow to take care of that. But somebody gets caught holding the bag at some point. And after World War I in Germany, there wasn't anything that they could do. They just owed so much money to the Allies, and probably rightly so, that they just started printing money. And of course, now I think almost every country does that on a regular basis, including the Swiss, by the way, because when I checked their numbers, they weren't as good as the numbers in for the United States. That was kind of a shocker. So anyway, we've got all this tremendous debt. We can never pay it back. It's just ridiculous to think that we can. So how are they going to pay it back? Well, the way that it's going to be paid back is through hyperinflation. In other words, they monetize the debt. And so, you know, today, the dollar obviously is worth a little bit less every year. In fact, the Federal Reserve has said that their inflation goal is 2%, which is kind of scary in itself. 2% right there. So in other words, if you keep your money in the bank and you're earning, what can you get in the bank in the United States? It's pretty common to get less than 1/2%. That's nothing. And inflation is 2% a year, and that's about what it's running right now, 1.8, 1.9, and that's the goal, by the way, of the Federal Reserve. So in other words, keeping your money in the bank, you're losing 1.5% a year. Think that one over. Now, it's true that you can find some online banks that will give you more than that. They'll give you around 2%, a little bit less. Sometimes that's an introductory offer. I talk to people all the time that are really excited about this really good deal that they've got someplace. They've been able to find a bond that pays that kind of money. But the problem with that is it's scary because usually those good deals don't last long and eventually they crash. If it looks like it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. But I can tell you that when it comes right down to it, we can complain all we want about financial institutions. The scariest institution out there is your own government, and what someday they might do to the value of the dollar. In other words, monetize the debt, high inflation, and sure, then they can pay back this 23 trillion or whatever it's going to be when they finally decide to do it. I mean, I don't know. I guess that when it gets around 30, 40 trillion, maybe they'll have to do that. But the truth of the matter is it's all psychological anyway. I mean, once the consumer lose faith in the United States dollar, there'll be a run on the bank. And that's what happened during the Great Depression. And there's no reason to think that it won't happen again. I mean, This stuff that I'm talking about, it's all in plain sight. It's just a matter of taking a look at the numbers, paying attention to what you read. Of course, what isn't in plain sight is where this is going to lead. And as an old guy, I'm an investor now. I'm very fortunate to have been able to retire almost 20 years ago. I spent a lot of time watching the business networks, and they love to bring on somebody that's a billionaire. When they really open up about what they're concerned about their family, their grandkids, their kids, and this tremendous debt that we're saddling them with. And they will actually talk about it. When was the last time you heard a politician talk about, oh, we've got too much debt?
And Bruce, what is the US dollar really worth?
Before 1971, the United States dollar read silver certificate, and theoretically, you could exchange it for a dollar's worth of silver. Apparently, it was pretty hard for a United States citizen to do so. At least nobody ever did it successfully, but foreign governments were able to do so. Well, President Nixon understood that at some point, European countries might make a run at the dollar. I think he was more worried about France than any other country. And so in 1971, it transitioned from silver certificate to Federal Reserve note. And what does that mean? It really doesn't mean a whole lot other than it's not backed up by any precious metal and hasn't been since then. It's basically worth what you think it is. Or, as the saying goes, it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government.
So Bruce, why is the US dollar the world's reserve currency?
You know, I do have 3 college degrees. I'm not sure that they help me any. Sometimes there might be a disadvantage because you believe too much the theories that your professors teach you as opposed to what really works in the real world. The reason I think that the United States seems to, well, obviously the world's reserve currency, is because as bad as our debt is, and you know, when you compare our debt to gross domestic product, 67% of our debt is to ourselves, other Americans, and an additional 86% is to the rest of the world. It's just crazy. But believe it or not, other than China, and they're really not that far behind us, we're doing much, much better than the rest of the wealthy industrialized nations. Japan is a good example. Japan, their public debt that they owe to other Japanese is 264%. Keep in mind, ours is only 67%. And their external debt, what they owe to the rest of the world, 108%, as opposed to ours at 86%. And Germany, everybody thinks Germany has such a great economy, almost debt-free. No, the debt that they owe to their countrymen is 58%. That's their public debt. Their external debt is 146%. United Kingdom. I like the United Kingdom. They speak the same language that I do. Bigger debt problems than we have. Their public debt, 99%. External debt, 184%. France, worse, 108% public debt. 184% external debt. Australians is 46%. External debt, 152%. Now, I don't know, Ireland isn't in the top 10, but it's interesting to bring them up. What the Irish owe to one another is 63%, but their external debt is a whopping 1,002%. Well, how much longer can this continue until it bursts? What we do in the United States, and what I suspect other countries do, is our central bank, the Federal Reserve, they print money out of thin air. In our case, the U.S. Department of Treasury, printing and engraving, they print it up and ship it over to the Federal Reserve Bank. There might not be enough trucks to haul it over there, but anyway, the Fed gets it for nothing, and they lend it out to member banks for the discount rate. I think the discount rate right now is about 2%. It could be 2.25. I think it just did come down 25 basis points, which is 0.25%. They lend it out to member banks. They mark it up. You know, you can get a 30-year mortgage in the States now for less than 4%. And so, in a sense, these large banks that are members of the Federal Reserve, they get the money for free. A government gives the money to them, and then they have to pay it back. But all they do is mark it up 1% or 2%, sometimes more if they're greedy. When they make a bad loan, guess what happens? If you make a bad loan, you don't get paid back. If you make a bunch of bad loans, that's when quantitative easing comes into play. You probably heard about it. They had the first round of quantitative easing quite some time ago. Then they had round 2, round 3, and now they don't even use the term anymore. It's just standard. But what that means is the Federal Reserve goes to the member banks and they buy up their portfolio of loans that have gone south. In other words, non-performing loans, they're not getting paid back. You know, it's just dragging the bank down. So they buy up their long-term loans that are basically in default, the Federal Reserve does, and then by doing that, that replenishes the money supply to these banks. And they do other things to pump money into the economy. It's all based on the greater fool theory. It's just nutso what's going on. The truth of the matter is, based on the numbers I just gave to you, it's pretty obvious that the rest of the world is doing something like that. And so it's all fake, and it's all built around the greater fool theory. As long as you believe it's worth something, and in effect, this might not go over very well with a lot of people. It requires a tremendous amount of faith that this system is going to stay solvent. In that respect, it's a little bit like religion.
And Bruce, how close was Puerto Rico to a total breakdown after the 2017 hurricane?
I personally believe we were about a week away. It was a devastating hurricane. I think it hit on September the 19th, 2017. Started feeling the effects about 5, 6 o'clock that evening, and it was still going the next day. Just hovered over this island. We'd been hit 9 or 10 days earlier by another hurricane that took out 20% of the island. The other side of the island. We're in the west, the east side of the island. And they had lost their electricity, their water. And when Hurricane Maria hit, they lost it again. And it was pretty doggone scary. They claim it was a Category 4. I pretty much live in a bunker, and that's by design. It's a cement house, and while I'm doing this interview, Mr. T, and you can see right over there, that's a Generac generator, and around the corner I have a huge propane tank. And so temporarily, at least, I had electricity. And I have a reserve water tank that holds 450 gallons. That great water supply, it lasted about 2 days. I could have gotten it to stretch a week or more, but when I ran out of water there, we do have a very small swimming pool, and because I had electricity, I was able to come up with a way to pump water from my swimming pool into my reserve water tank. And although that wasn't what they call culinary or potable water, something you could drink, I guess you could if you had to, we did have water for bathing, showering, washing clothes, washing dishes. And so what we did is we drank bottled water, and that worked out great until I came up with this great idea, which I think any of us would do. Is I knew some of my neighbors and friends did not make preparations, did not have bottled water or enough of it to last more than a couple days. And by week number 2, I'd given away almost all of my bottled water. Fortunately, I had a friend that had a well. His water never tasted quite right. It kind of had a metallic taste to it. And I started going over to visit him a couple times a week and filling up milk jugs full of water, when the truth of the matter is I probably had enough water to last 3 months, maybe even longer. But I gave so much of it away that, hey, I put myself in a bind. As far as food, had plenty of food. Because of my prepper background, we had plenty of food. A lot of it was freeze-dried, and we ate quite well. And once again, we did share some of that with friends. I started out the hurricane with $1,000 in cash. I thought that was plenty of money. Small denominations. I figured those ATMs would be open back up in a couple days. Wow, was I ever wrong. That hurricane took out cell phone towers, the ability to communicate, period, of course, along with that with the internet, and it was just crazy. Grocery stores understand this, and so they have to have backup electricity to keep their perishables refrigerated. And so that meant that they opened right back up. But what I did not realize is that food stamps in America are no longer paper or a stamp. They're actually a credit card, a family card. And without an internet operating, the grocery stores would not accept their food stamp cards. They wouldn't take IOUs, they wouldn't do any of that stuff. So, you know me, I believe in the golden rule, and I just started giving people $20 if I could tell that they really needed beans and rice or whatever commodity they were trying to buy. And by the start of the second week, I was down, out of that $1,000, I was down to $297. Just nutso on my part, but what do? I don't want to see somebody else go hungry, you know, when I've got a way to help them. In the future, in a situation more serious, I don't think I would do that, but that's what I did this last time. It was crazy. We were, in my opinion, about a week away from total chaos. You know, the first 3 days, I think people pretty much had, you know, what they needed, or they could find somebody that would help them. And Puerto Rican people are very generous. They're family oriented, and they really look out for their families. We saw some things that other people didn't see. Also, we had to go to San Juan about a week after the hurricane. San Juan is about the capital, and it's about 100 miles from here. And the roads were passable, but it was, you know, what normally would take 2.5 hours, you know, might take 5, 6 hours. I was able to see some of this firsthand, and also I was able to watch CNN, which I really don't trust CNN. The mainstream media is pretty much propaganda, in my opinion. You can believe what you want, but trust but verify. It's really sad that we don't have objective news anymore, and if you think it's NPR in the United States, I don't think so, because they haven't done anything to expose the upcoming or pending financial crisis. At the beginning of week 3, the federal government figures this out. They figure out that President Trump's plan to distribute supplies through the mayors was a recipe for disaster, because when you think about it, and I saw this stuff in my own church, who ends up with emergency relief supplies first, and they get all that they want, probably a little bit more? The mayor, his family, his friends, and the city workers. And so that happened throughout Puerto Rico, and I saw a little bit of that with my own church, which really offended me, because, you know, that's just not the way things ought to be, but that's the way things were here. And so, as a great American once said, the most frightful or scary language in the English language is, we are the government and we are here to help. When you have to rely on the government, you are in big trouble. And that's why we are borderline preppers.
And Bruce, what are the specific things that one should prep for in case a hurricane hits us?
In the aftermath of a hurricane, an earthquake, which would probably be much worse, first off, a satellite phone. No cell service for many months. You could drive around the island and find places where you could communicate by cell phone. They were far and few between. It was so funny, you'd be driving down the freeway, all of a sudden people would be pulled over on their cell phone, and they'd be talking. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks after the hurricane. It was hilarious, but at least you know where to stop, where there was a hot spot. You could talk to somebody back home. Well, before the hurricane, we called everybody in the family. Our friends said, don't worry about us, we're prepared, we're gonna be fine. It might be hard for us to get a hold of you after the hurricane, and I can tell you, after a disaster like we had, that's just not enough for them. And they really try to contact you, and there's just really no way to do it. And so if we had a satellite phone, we could have solved that problem. We could have contacted them, and, you know, they're expensive and kind of a hassle, and, you know, make sure the batteries are working and everything like that. But at least your family knows. The next thing, a chainsaw. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the roads out here. I mean, as anybody that's lived in the Caribbean knows, vegetation is everywhere. Trees grow so fast, it's almost like you can stick a piece of wood in a flower pot, water it, and it'll start to bud. Just absolutely unreal. So we were out driving around many times, and with a chainsaw, we could have cleared some of the brush and trees and limbs and stuff like that out of the way. And the third thing is really going to surprise you. Absolutely essential. Plastic gas cans. As many of those as you can safely store. I think I've got somewhere around 10 5-gallon cans, because after all, and you're going to need fuel and, you know, mixing oil for your chainsaw. And like I said, we were fortunate. We had 4 vehicles full of gasoline and a boat with 200 gallons that I could actually siphon out of. And that's another thing, late model cars, you cannot siphon gasoline out of them. They've done something to them, but those, in my youth, I remember out on the farm that you could siphon gas out of one vehicle into another if worse came to worse. You can't do that anymore. There's no way, and I tried hard. But my boat, I could siphon gasoline out of my boat, and that did work. But those three things are really important. Of course, assuming that already you have shelter, food, and water. Water being the most important. Can't survive without water.
And Bruce, how should we prepare for a potential global financial meltdown?
I mean, we're not going to take this lying down, right? We're going to go out there and try to do something about it. Well, my sense is that just about everybody that listens to Mr. T has some kind of investment, you know, real estate, bonds, stocks, combination thereof. But we are the type of people that are all trying to be prepared for a rainy day. If that wasn't true, we wouldn't be able to travel the way that we do. Well, the first thing to do is take a real hard look at your stock market portfolio and see where you think you're vulnerable. And if it's trading at all-time highs, it might be a good time to sell. Do your own due diligence. Don't take my advice, but frankly, when things go up like crazy, they get a tendency for the bubble to burst, and they might go down like crazy. Certainly there are some blue chip stocks out there that over the years have done really well. I'm invested in some of those. But it's really important to have a balanced portfolio, to diversify, and that's what I do and many other like-minded people do. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to tell you that I'm a brilliant investor, because I don't think that I am. But I've done okay over the years, and I'll admit that I have been retired for almost 20 years because I understood a couple things. And one of those things that I understood was the concept of delayed gratification. In other words, when we get a little bit older, it would be nice to do a little bit of travel. Well, anyway, I like commodities. I consider them to be less prone to the dangers of inflation. The commodities that I favor, I guess I put real estate into that, would be things such as, once again, I like real estate. I think it can be a hedge against inflation. I like precious metals, gold, silver, even copper sometimes in some situations. I like energy. I like oil, natural gas. I don't like coal, but that's a whole nother discussion. I do recognize that in the future, renewables will kick in and probably make some sense. Today, I don't think they really do, other than a prepper application, because when the sun doesn't shine nor the wind blow, no electricity, and you have to have some way to back it up or store it, and the battery capacity just isn't there. I can say this because in the family we've had 3 Teslas, and they are great around town. Try taking one on a trip, you're not going to be very happy. So that's the future, but for now, hydrocarbons make a lot of sense, other than coal, which the reason for that, in my opinion, is there's just so much oil, natural gas. In fact, natural gas now is considered almost a byproduct. They burn it off in some places in the United States, which I think is ridiculous. But anyway, about 10% of your portfolio, in my opinion, should be in some kind of precious metals. I personally prefer silver and gold mining stock. They're leveraged, and you can usually do quite a bit better on them when precious metals are going up, and right now they are starting to go up again. What causes precious metals to go up? Uncertainty in the market. Why is there uncertainty in the market? Because of this tremendous debt that we're all saddled with, and the fact that our money is just printed out of thin air. Once again, there might be a situation where there's a complete breakdown in communications. No internet, no cell phones. We had that happen after Hurricane Maria, and that's not going to do you a lot of good to have a substantial amount of money, your nest egg in other words, with a financial institution when you can't get to it. But what might do you some good is if you actually have some gold and some silver tucked away someplace on your property where only you can find it, nobody else can. Because in those dire situations, especially if they start printing money a lot faster than the world public opinion accepts, you're gonna need that. And in going one step further, it's just not a matter of having some what they call junk silver or gold. And personally, I prefer silver, the smallest denominations possible, smallest size possible. I prefer silver. Silver right now is selling for somewhere around $17 an ounce, and I think gold is around $1,500. You see gold and silver start spiking, there's a reason for that. That tells you that the stock market will probably start heading the other way because the investors have lost confidence in the market. And that's a dead giveaway right there. It's important, in my opinion, to have guns and ammo to protect your life, your property, and the lives of your loved ones. I mean, it's just basic common sense. And when the lights go out, like they did here in Puerto Rico, unfortunately, folks in the Dominican Republic and weren't nearly as impacted. You can see that that is very important. I have to say this, I'm not comfortable saying it, but I feel like I have to say it. But in those situations where food, water, shelter are not readily available, the people with the guns are just going to take from you what they want. And those people potentially could be law enforcement, National Guard, the military. Believe me, they're going to eat and drink before you and your loved ones do, which might seem kind of scary, but it's also very practical to think that way. I mean, it's just common sense.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Excellent information. Well done. And I hope you, the viewers, enjoyed the information that he shared and that you will refer this video to other people. Also, feel free to support my channel because it costs time, effort, energy, and relationships and much more to make these videos. So if you want to contribute, in the right-hand corner of the channel, you can click donate or go directly to my website, educatedtraveler.info, and make a donation. Thank you very much. Happy travels. See you later. Bye-bye.